And you're alive.
All right, everybody, welcome to House Education Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. The committee is going to take the next block of time to really discuss H 454. Everybody's had an opportunity during our break to go through it with the assignment to sort of pick out areas of it they like, whether they be sort of a general comment or specifics, gaps, and areas of improvement. Are people feeling ready for that? Would anybody like an example of is anybody prepared to go first?
No.
I would be happy to lead things off. So as I read through this bill, if we all would go to page 30.
Helpful people mark their pages sections.
I have been intrigued and I've reread it a bunch of different times about the whole school choice, school concept. And, you know, how we address and figure independent schools or school choice or whatever into our system in the future is something that we wrangle with and will continue to wrangle with. And I said, oh, well, all right, what really does this say to me? Other people interpret it differently. So for me, sort of, I look at the idea of a school choice school as being a way to say, okay, it accommodates those independent schools that we know have been part of the system traditionally, and sets up a sort of a higher level of standard. But so if I sort of went through it little by little, let's say 9 through 12. Yeah, I support that choice should probably be something that's limited to 9 through 12. That a school choice school must use state standardized assessments, implement state graduation requirements, provide special ed just as any other school does. Completion of an annual single audit is important. I think there might, in the case of an independent school, might need to be more of what we have today in terms of financial oversight. Compliance with the school choice school requirements of educational quality standards, compliance with fire and safety, compliance with all non-discrimination, same HHB, to B1, it's limited to those schools that have 51% public school attendance as of, I'd probably say 2024, because we don't really know the numbers for 2025 yet. They lag by several months. Non-discriminatory lottery, the same protections or better for suspending or expelling students. I think these are all worth thinking about. Now, the way I see it, it really does sort of say, if you are a district that has one of those qualifying schools, you can name it a school choice school. That politically is sort of a way to accommodate those, especially the academies. There are a couple others that have traditionally played a role. It's very limiting here. The amount that goes to the school is the same. The part that I don't necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily agree with is the requirement that you even have one. That if you're a school district, it should be up to the school board whether you have a school choice school, whether it's a public school or an independent school that meets all of these qualifications. And the same would be for the language that I think was somewhat new about setting aside 10% school choice school seats, 10% of your 9 through 12 population. To me, that would be a decision made by the district school board as to how that would get set up. So I would just take that as an example of language in here that I found intriguing and worth thinking about. There are areas in this proposal where a lot more needs to be fleshed out. Doesn't really speak to how do we bring together a whole bunch of collective bargaining agreements unless we're leaving it up to the district board. I like the concept of fewer districts. Not sure if 5 is my number, and we continually will face the challenge of, as we go into smaller or larger districts, fewer districts of different delivery models. In a way, this bill addresses that with the school choice school setup. It's really designed to sort of answer that question. And in many ways, based on what I just said, it sort of does. So anyway, those are areas that I think are intriguing and worth thinking about.
So, in that same section on school choice, and again, don't have all the answers yet. But limiting it to 9 to 12, I'm slightly concerned about just because of where I live and what there are for options and how far away public schools are.
Yeah.
For some of my students, I know there would be carve outs, but, so just questioning that piece. Also, the 51% as of now, or being an independent school as of July 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So what does that mean about schools in the future? You know, being available as being school choice schools that aren't already in existence so just a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I think school choice schools or independent schools have to be an option, especially in some areas of the state, like where I live.
I mean, let's be clear. I think when I read this, it really just limits it to the 4 academies.
And
And maybe
maybe
several
maybe
others.
2 other
Yeah,
high
a couple
schools,
others.
and that's it.
So anyway, that's sort of my fulfillment of the assignment. I'm sure there are other areas of it. Casey, you want to go next? We'll go around this way.
Well, since it was my proposal, I liked a lot of it. I didn't really pick out a specific one that I liked the most or intrigued me. I think where we need to start, where I would start would be districts, and I know you said 5. I think people have a problem with the 5. And I would be open to hear where we'd go from with the governor proposal of the 5 districts in here, what it would be going to be. I looked at Baumgart's map. I specifically only focused my attention on my district, and I liked the district that I was set up. Instead of it being grouped in with Chittenden County, Addison County, kind of goes across the top. And I think those are, for me, what it looked like were similar counties where you had like one shire town and then a rural community around it. That's why I kind of liked it. So that's kind of where I was focusing on over the break. I like a lot of the things on here. I've heard a lot of feedback from many of the problems that people have with the bill itself. And part of my thing is just like telling people, this is just the blueprint. This is not anything, no decisions have been made with this yet. So I think that's where I was focusing more on is the districts itself. I don't have a page number, but just those districts. And Peter, I just have one question. You said you would want to change, the school choice schools, you would want to leave to the districts to make those decisions.
Yes, I think this language requires that every district have one.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, why would we require that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer to why you would require that.
Can we go back to just the 17-page thing that really kind of indicated, I believe the sentence was, a district can have as many school choice schools as it wishes.
That's right.
Right, right.
So leaving it up, leaving it up to the district to actually decide if they want one. So
Or
district-
20.
Or, yeah, or, right, exactly. And if they're talking independent school or public school, meaning their school choice
Right.
school, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, that's what I have.
So Casey, I'm gonna put you down for, you support fewer districts, but perhaps not 5.
Not the 5 that were there. I would entertain Baumgart's map. And to be honest, I specifically only looked at my district. I didn't know how the rest of the state would be shaped out. I didn't really put too much thought, because I don't really know those districts as well as my district. So that's basically, I didn't want to like make decisions for those and think, have too much of an opinion on it. But I did like the idea of that northern district was really, it looked nice to me.
Leanne?
My town meeting experience was that all 4 of my towns who are all signed up for this Small Schools Alliance, are asking us not to do much to close our elementary schools, and that the task that they really tasked us with was to really look at, the way that we fund education. And I realize that that's not our purview, that is the gov ops, but I don't think that we can have a complete conversation without discussing that. And I think that we can do more to actually bring it down. I just cannot imagine telling, especially in our rural areas, our people that they are going to have to shut down their small schools if it's going to not lower property taxes, or if it's going to keep them the same. I mean, it's just like shuffling things around and saying nothing changed. And I don't think that's what we were tasked with. What I would suggest as far as the Baumgart's map might,
Well, that's
That's it.
one of many maps.
Yeah.
right. So what I was gonna say about that is my community of Craftsbury actually did not like that. They were placed in the wrong district. I think that that can be fixed. I'm not sure why that happened. I couldn't really explain why that happened, but I think it's an easy fix if we went with that. However, I don't think that's the map we should go with. I think that what I'm hearing the most support for is the 17 CTE districts. What I like about that is that it is tied to educational and career development outcomes. And so I feel like if we're going to be changing district lines, there has to be really specific reasons why we're choosing those lines. And that the cost is not just the bottom line. A school and education is not a business. So sometimes there are things that are more important than just what the bottom dollar is. And so I think I would go with CTEs. Another thing that I noticed about this, you're just looking at for us to tell all of our main points right now?
Well, we were starting off with, what do you like?
Okay.
What do you, would like to see improved, and where do you see gaps?
Okay, I think that one gap that I see is on page 5, it goes through all the secretary's duties, but we also have this bill that's hanging up there about whether or not we want to move all of this out of the Agency of Education back to the Vermont State School Board and Department of Education. And I'm wondering if it makes more sense to decide on that before we go too far down this, if we'd have to change it. So that's one thing I'm wondering. As far as the ratios per pupil, I wonder if they're too high, especially for rural districts. And every teacher I'm hearing from is saying that the 25 for it is not really practical. And again, getting back to that is the dollar, the bottom line. I think the good education is the bottom line. And so if we're sacrificing the good education for the dollar, I'm not sure that that's really the purpose of school leadership. And then as far as the school choice schools go, I would like to see language that would make it so that those 4 historical academies could still be the school on record for the towns and the districts that don't have schools. But I just don't know that we need to open up school choice school for public schools. And I'm also wondering about schools, like I'm thinking of like Riverside and Lindenville. So what I wonder is, would towns that don't have elementary schools still get to use schools like that? Could we grandfather them in somehow without completely opening the door for all other elementary options? And then the other thing that I think we really need to talk about is this advisory board. I'm not hearing a lot of support for an advisory board. I really think it sounds like a glorified PTA, but with 17 districts, maybe that can be changed a little bit so there's more representation. But I still worry about the line on page 78 that says pursuant to proportionate voting districts. I think in rural areas, less dense populations, they're going to feel completely disenfranchised if you have a 5, and it says 5-member boards. If you have a 5-member board and you have multiple districts that all came together, there are parts of that district that are never going to have representation on that school board. And so both of those, I think, need to be amended. And I'm also, I think that we need to talk about what local control means to us, because between the school board conversation and the school advisory conversation, we need to know what it is that schools can decide besides their budget. Like I know that there really is not that much local control over our school budgets anymore, and that's making people say, oh, there is no local control, but there is local control over some decisions still. And I think we need to figure out what those decisions are and why they're important. so that we can sort of know the difference between what an advisory board isn't capable of deciding. And do you know about the Linden, so one of the things that came out is this Linden Institute letter, which is saying that like they couldn't survive if we shut them down, which I know that we're not, I will say on record, we're not really talking about shutting down Linden Institute or St. J Academy. But I'm struggling with this idea that if private institutions can't survive without our public funds and they're dependent on us supporting them, then why are they not just public schools? And that's, I'm really trying to, like, it's not our job to shore up private institutions. Oh, one more thing before, sorry, I'll pass the torch in a second, or the mic in a second, but one more thing is that in this list of what private institutions need to do to be approved, one of the things I see that they don't have to do, which all of our public schools do, is provide lunch. So I don't know if we want to think about that. And then the other thing is the transportation issue. You pointed to the line that said, as long as it's a non-discriminatory lottery. And I would say that any lottery is discriminatory if we're not providing transportation in its very nature. And the same thing with the religious. There was a part that said like the secretary can waive the non-discrimination clause if there are certain groups of people that are still meeting most. I'm trying to find out what page it is. Hold on. Oh, it's on page 35.
Yeah.
After the filing of the enrollment notice or at a hearing, if the school is unable to comply with any specific requirements due to deep religious conviction shared by an organized group, the secretary may waive such requirements. I don't think we should waive.
That's, I think, to have to do with the court case. I think that's-
So we can't change that.
Is that on page
35?
It's on page 35. And I'm just saying, I don't think that we should waive any strong religious convictions from anti-discrimination with public. But
That the
maybe I'm
Carson-
misunderstanding what this says.
The Carson.
It's-
That's current language that
Yeah.
you're reading from,
Yeah, so
not.
there's
not
nothing we
over
can do about that? Is that what you're saying?
No, not.
Oh, okay.
What I'm saying is what you're reading there, what changed was he or she to the secretary.
Okay,
That is, anything that's not underlined is actually current.
so we can't change current.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so
We
in
can't.
moving forward, I would suggest that we also need to really carefully examine why we would waive discriminatory requirements for people with strong religious convictions.
Sure, but the way this actually defines what private schools would be eligible
Mhm.
to be a school choice school, I don't think any qualify any.
Okay, great, good news. And those are my thoughts.
Great. Yeah, school advisory councils, ratios. What about small schools and the issue of why, if it's not gonna reduce costs, why are we going to close them? I don't think anything in here says anything about closing schools, but it
Right.
does set minimums here and there that might result. in- But there's
Mhm.
nothing in here that says anybody's closing schools.
No, but I mean, it does speak to numbers and
Yes.
so like, I mean, I think if you follow that sort of
Yeah,
line,
absolutely.
it could happen.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that we can do that if we're not saving money. Like, if we want to take drastic measures, I would say our drastic measures should more be in figuring out how we tax and who we tax than it should be in changing our educational practices.
Rob, you're up.
Okay, I got a couple things, but I'll just hit you one at a time. I was reminded over the weekend, because he was nice enough, the governor wrote a nice op-ed in our local paper. One of the things he said right out of the gate was about his proposal and teacher pay. And, you know, I think on somewhere in here, it says something about teacher pay, page 38. But I want to go beyond just lip service. I mean, I do. I mean, I want to see a pay grid because I think that we have trouble recruiting teachers in the state. And I want to incentivize that also by putting in a provision for ed loan forgiveness. I mean, I know that VSAC has that, but I'm saying if he's serious about paying teachers, let's pay teachers. And let's recruit them from out of state and offer, I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge bit, but if you're you know, if you're just starting out and maybe some ed loan forgiveness is just a little bit, I mean, you know, small percentage. Can we fold that in? Good. Now I got other stuff to say, but I'll keep
All right.
passing.
No, go ahead, go ahead more.
Yeah.
You want me to keep going?
Keep
Okay.
going. Give us the whole thing.
Okay, so it does talk a little bit about small schools in there. And I know that there's a lot of worry even in my area down in Manchester. The Arlington folks are scared and I'm wondering if, and it talks about eligible small schools. I didn't, you know, it had a number of 450 and I was trying to wrap my head around all that, chase that down. But I wondered if we could put something in here where we as a group define a viable small school. Right? And what is a viable small school? So I was just like brainstorming. So maybe they have no fewer than 300 students, and they send the national average to 4 and 2 year post-secondary. They offer basic to advanced courses. They offer at least one foreign language. They offer CTE. They have a fully staffed guidance, college career counselors, offers full range of sports and extracurriculars. Like, I guess I'm seeing like, I mean, it's one thing if you get like 90 kids in a school, 9 through 12, and they're just kind of on their last legs and they can't offer stuff. But what if they're actually doing everything? You know, and they're, so could we define what a viable small school is and say, well, if you can meet all these standards and you're happy as a clam and your community loves you, well, we'll leave you alone. But I don't know. The other thing, and this goes to a conversation that we were all having, and this goes to your concern as well. But and we've been throwing this around, and I know there's a separate bill, but if we talk about building construction aid, but also we make the best deal in here, especially for rural districts. And we say like, and this is kind of along the lines of a conversation we were having at lunch. If you lose something, you should get something. Why not have the most amazing regional school be put up instead of these 4 little ones where 4 or 5 communities get to decide what the school is going to look like, where they're going to get to decide who the mascot is, where they're going to get to decide what the name of the school is and how their Hall of Fame is going to look because of all the past athletes from the last 100 years get to go in there, right? And how they get to have all of the resources, even a theater, even an all-weather field, all of the stuff that all the great schools have. But incentivize it in such a way that they're like, yeah, screw the small school, like we're going over here. And I see this as a boon for building, neighborhoods going up. People want to move here because this is an amazing regional school. And I mean, I know that we're talking money here and I'm dreaming big, but I'm just saying like, I think that if school size is an issue, and your word, accessibility, where even the kids out in the country who don't necessarily have an art teacher, who don't necessarily have an after-school sport, how do we deliver this to all of them? Like, I want every kid to have a great experience at every school. So those are just some things that I saw in here, or at least I think there were gaps, because you sent me home saying, where do I see gaps? But I would love to see specifics about this going forward. You know, if we're going to close these 4 schools, what are we going to give them? What do they get in return? They get something better, right? They get more programs, they get more facilities, right? Counselors on campus, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I got.
Great. Thank you. Jana?
All right. So this has been great. I've been busy taking notes on everything you all have been sharing. So I guess for me, maybe start with some things that are in the bill that I actually, I think are maybe pointing us in the right direction. So this is a really small thing, but the piece in there about, convening a task force or a study committee around our therapeutic school system, like sort of what that utilization looks like, where the money's being spent. I think we've started to hear some pretty interesting things in witness testimony about some collaborative relationships between schools that are trying to bring some of this programming more in-house in a regional way. I think, I actually think my own district has done some sort of unique and interesting things in bringing some of that programming back, under the roof of our schools in the district. So I think that's definitely exploring that more in the future, whatever that looks like, is definitely a step in the right direction. You know, as well as some of the good stuff that's in here just around more, statewide uniformity where it makes sense, like that, you know, having a more sort of well-resourced agency that can sort of do some of that work and build some cohesion would be really excellent. So, I think those are, yes.
Do you see that in the specifics about AOE capacity increasing the bill?
No, I
All right,
see,
all right. I was like,
see,
I wondered. if
no,
missed that.
I don't
want
believe so. I mean, I think I see it here like a drive towards some uniformity and cohesion, and I think a necessary piece of that is the resourcing and capacity of the agency. And then I guess in terms of a couple of big concerns, my brain is a little stuck on the school choice school concept. I think the way it's sort of presented in this bill brings us into a much different legal context than the world we currently live in, where school choice is like very much tied to geography. And I think there's probably a lot of sort of legal issues to mine if we were to, you know, transform the system in the way that's being suggested. I think there could definitely be some maybe unintended or intended consequences to that we would really want to think pretty carefully about. And then just the concept of a much smaller number of school board members to serve whatever number of larger districts might exist across the state and, you know, proposed future state. And, you know, that gives me some concern as well. I don't know if we want a Senate of public education in Vermont, which is sort of what a 25-member school board across the state would look like. That's an opinion, I guess. That's what I have.
Right. Let's see, I'm trying to take them in order that they're in the bill, if I have the notes right. Well, I support the efforts to consolidate some of our district operations and governance, and see the value in that. I have big concerns about 5 and the way it's set up here, but the proposition I understand. And I really like 3 things. I really like page 45, not voting on school budgets locally. I think that is a important part of our transformation. I think that that's become just a very polarizing, it requires that we have stable funding and that we have, we have strong school boards, and a functioning AOE, but we're one of 2 states at most that does that. And I think it's becoming increasingly damaging in our political environment and volatile, in our, in an economic environment that schools cannot control: inflation, recessions, tariffs, so many things that, have people really anxious about finances. So, I really appreciate moving away from that. I like Jana said, some school year, school day consistency and uniformity, particularly the calendar. I am intrigued by the increased student attendance days. I think that comes with some other considerations, but I'm intrigued by that. I wish we went a little further with some statewide consistency, as we've heard testimony about finance systems, student information systems, the other sort of statewide coherence pieces. I think those are really important. And I am also concerned about the school choice schools concept. I really appreciate the ending of sending tuition out of country. I appreciate the I think attempted inclusion of our academies, which function as quasi-public schools, and creating more equal expectations between the two. I don't see, as we're trying to move to scale, increasing the number of schools and pots that we might send money to or students to feels counter to scale to me. And that we want to be putting more heads under roofs, and if we start expanding the number of schools, that seems counter to that goal. I'll leave it at that.
So it came around to me again. I'll just say, the thing one thing I do want to add is fewer districts, but to me, a 5-person board is not acceptable. I would rather see 11, something where, you're protected against an outside interest coming in and basically buying the seats, right? And it addresses a little bit of Leanne's issues as well, so more people, more opportunity for broader representation.
You reminded me of the other, I think the other district piece I really agree with about, you know, in terms of some consolidation is also that we have all operating districts, you know, that we're getting away from the sort of supervisory union structure and that kind of, I think, that's some of those challenges that exist. So I do appreciate those towards, operating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the consolidation of districts. Not in agreement with 5, honestly. Would think we would need to be more with the 9, the 12, possibly even the 17 with the CTEs. So I don't have really a firm number in my head for that, but those all seem like good options to talk about at least. Definitely, like the calendar, as Rep. Brady said, and the increased attendance days. I'm kind of like, I like it, but I'm kind of like, why are we doing it? So, and I think some of the gaps, I think, are deciding and doing maybe some carve outs for some of those smaller independent schools, not just having them be a 9 through 12 as a school choice school in the areas that is probably going to be necessary. And I won't say a gap or I don't like, but an area of concern to me and wanting more information is the duties of the AOE and the board, right? Of why the consolidation into most of it into AOE. Not necessarily a real concern. I just would like to know more why that is the avenue we're taking.
Great, appreciate it. All right, Josh.
So for me, the conversation around school choice, I actually like what's in here for this version of choice. It doesn't look like it wants to add independent schools, especially since we're in moratorium. It's not like we are able to add any. So I think that kind of pulls that thought process off the table unless we somehow change that. Adding it's up to the districts to add schools outside of if we go with the one mandatory or they get to choose whether they want or not. I don't see that, that's up to the districts, right? So I don't see in that landscape districts trying to add a ton of choice schools because I'm sure they would see how it would potentially positively or negatively impact their region, right? Some regions may want to have 5, some regions may not want to have it. So I think that's I don't know that really is a concern to me. I do like the ability for the public school system to really, from even listening to Zoe talk about this, where those schools who are going to be choice, have to have something that make them be a choice school. Like, are they an art school or they are a STEM school or whatever like that? I think is I like that because then it gives some specificity to what you might do as a student. Districts and funding is really where I keep going, right? Like I see the benefit of 5 districts from a consistency and operational standpoint. I don't know that I have a taste for it here at the moment. Like I really have to play that through more. I do kind of like the Senate one. I like that, or Bongers, that I like that it has the carve out for interstate, right, districts. They're really playing to those needs of the interstate students.
So I just to be clear, interstate districts have to be carved out. No matter what.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, that's one thing that caught my eye there. But I'm like, man, I keep going back to the tech center districts. I thought it was 15, but 17. I could be wrong. I thought it was 15.
It's a little
districts
confusing in
that
the Northeast Kingdom because of whether you count Linden and
St.
St. Johnsbury as
Okay.
1 or 2.
I didn't, but I keep
Yeah.
going to that same map because it puts the tech center in every district and it broadens out how many districts we have. But again, to me, 5, coming from a business background, I can see the benefit of the larger the operation, the more consistency across all the buildings or facilities. So you can have more of a similar education. It's like I'm going to use Starbucks, right? You go to Starbucks in Boston, you go to Starbucks in Burlington, you get the same cup of coffee, you get the same experience. So it helped, like having that bigger organizational map helps you have that similar experience. But again, is it too broad? That's where I struggle with that. A gap I have is really transportation, and I think a place to look for that is like the Sharon Academy uses local rural transit to help offset the lack of busing available through like regular school buses. They don't have to buy school buses. They don't have to go through, like the rural transit company actually partnered with them. So they go out pretty far to be able to get kids to school. So I think like looking at and taking testimony of broader transportation ideas could really help fill in the gaps around transportation for kids and students that are maybe would be considered marginalized just because of geographical location. I could keep going, but I won't.
I just say, obviously, the transportation gets really challenging because there's this whole, what they call in loco parentis legal doctrine that says that the second your child climbs on a school bus, the school is now responsible for that child. And that when it's a rural transportation system, it's not the school system where that sort of custody and legal obligation to the child resides.
But just like maybe there's a hybrid model that satisfies all of it. I don't know.
That was the other one is public, or the public transportation system. All right, Kate, I can do this.
Yeah. I like the idea that we might be able to spend less on administration and spend more on instruction. I feel like we've continued to ask, we were told that this plan would save 182 million, I think, and they have not shown us the money. Besides getting rid of universal school meals, which to me is a non-starter. So I'm not convinced that this will save money. But I like the idea that fewer districts might mean fewer central offices, might mean fewer money spent on administration and more on student-facing instruction and instructional strategies. I very much want to make sure that as we continue to talk about this, that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot when we talk about the possibility of small schools closing in rural communities. It would mean a loss of people. It has meant in these communities, a loss of young people, a loss of population, a loss of jobs and economic activity, and a loss of community connection. And I think we have a real opportunity to put those things back in play in some of our most remote areas of the state. And again, I keep going back to Guildhall because it's where I spent my first 3 years of life, and there was a vibrant school across the street at the time, and now that school doesn't service kids. So moving towards all districts being operating districts, if I understand that phrase, operating districts, correctly, we're talking about all districts would have schools in them. And there wouldn't be choice districts anymore. There may be some choices within a district, but we wouldn't have district choice districts anymore. And then going back to the show me the money kind of thing. The one time we did have somebody that I assume the AOE paid a consultant and he came in, and to go back to your point about, paying teachers more, that whole scenario just felt like a bunch of smoke and mirrors, starting with a slide that said, we're going to pay teachers $10,000 more, and then getting to a slide that says, we're going to pay teachers $5,000 more, and then actually showing me what teachers would get paid with salary and benefits, and it being less than what I make right now. So again, I like some of the ideas, and I'm not very specific at page numbers and whatever, but I am unconvinced at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm not gonna do page numbers either, 'cause- and so many of you have already spoken, so. No, I will mention a couple of your comments in support of them, and won't go into the detail around them, but first and foremost for me is making sure that as we are making our decisions and as we're having communication with our constituents as well throughout this, that we're putting students first.
Yes.
It is just really critical to me. I want to make sure that we're framing our decisions around improving educational opportunity and outcomes for students. And that is our goal, that is our job, that is what we should be doing. So I will always be keeping that in my mind as we're making these decisions ahead of us. You won't be surprised from my previous comments that I want to still keep rulemaking in the State Board of Education. I still believe strongly that a very powerful public education system governed by an independent and neutral board, a neutral and independent board that is well-resourced and knows what their job is really important to me. So I don't want to just keep rulemaking with the state board and not go to the agency, but I actually want to strengthen the role of the state board and clarify exactly what our expectations are from them. I also want to make sure that we're resourcing in whatever way we can as we move forward. Well, we have to, the AOE, that is critically important. They're going to play an important role throughout this whole process. I want to, switching topics, I want to explore a little bit more about minimum class sizes versus the student teacher ratio piece. I just think we need more testimony on that. I'm not clear in my head which approach is better, but I know which one I prefer in this moment, but I would like to, just get some more information on that. I know this may or may not be included in this bill that we choose to move forward, but I, again, feel really strongly about school construction aid and that we need to move forward with some form of school construction aid, but I don't think it should just be school construction aid, but I think we need to consider if there are schools that do close down the road at some point, communities need support for that transition. And some of it might be financial, as possible, but I don't even think that's the only kind of support municipalities need. I think they need to figure out what a community really does need if they have that loss in their community, because that's what it is, and we should face that.
Yeah.
Other than money, what can we?
Well, I know the reason I mentioned that is there were many questions when one of our communities, it was one in my school district, but not one I represent as a legislator. But they had many questions around just warnings. How do we warn it when we warn to close our school? And do we need to pay an attorney? Can we use the school district's attorney? That sort of stuff all came up. There were a lot of, there's a guidance could be prepared for municipalities, just simple, that would be straightforward. That's just one, I think, of many. People need to know what they can, what are possibilities there for what their building could be used for, or can it be used, do they need to tear it down? Those are all, I just think there's more money, I think would be important just for engineering costs and legal fees. Money would help, but I don't think it should be limited to just that. Anyway, there's a lot of things that we can think about for that. I just wanted to mention, Jana brought up the thing about therapeutic schools and strengthening specialists. It's been a big deal for me. And my district is also one of the districts who has been exploring many times over the years, as our rural high schools end up doing regularly, trying to make sure that we're serving our students in our building where they belong. And I want to make sure, I love the idea that of strengthening special ed services in our schools for our students. Aaron mentioned about the school choice schools concept, and I agree with your perspective on that. So just put me down as that. But there's many nuances around all of this that I really do want to continue to explore. I would really prefer for us to, this is my last thing I'll say, looking forward, making sure that we're looking down the road. I don't want us to be hobbled by We need to get something done immediately. This
Right.
is, I want us to be thinking short, medium, and long term
Yes.
around all this, and I want to be able to frame it in a way that says, what can we do, not what can't we do? And the reason I say that is because you and I had a conversation at one point about what happens if you don't have access, you don't have public schools in your region, and you suddenly don't have access to the independent schools you've been using. And I thought, well, why can't we create a regional public elementary school? I mean, why is it that we don't think that we can actually build and create where our needs are? I understand money's a challenge. There's no, I mean, that's a given, and we know all of that.
Yeah.
But in the long run, I don't think we should be held back because we don't have the funds we don't believe we have the funds. This is why I'm talking about
Figured out.
thinking short term and long term, you know. So anyway, those are just my surface thoughts around all of this and how to frame.
Well, I'll start with that one before I forget. You're right, because again, for me, I'm not saying anything. Yes, because that's a long-term solution. So in the interim, there have to be options, at least in the interim. And yes, money's definitely a concern. Having a building site available is a concern, environmental concerns, brownfields, et cetera. So, yeah, long range. We're not gonna build regional schools tomorrow. So having a medium range plan for the meantime, I think is important as well. So a couple things that struck me, definitely consolidation, I think has to happen on a major scale to move the needle. I don't know that 5 is the number, but I think if you go higher than the teens, it's not gonna accomplish anything. It's just gonna kick the can down the road. I do like the idea of having some statewide consistency. The constant reinventing of the wheel by every supervisory union. I mean, and it's that balance between local control and state control, freedom and unity. But when every district had to create its own proficiency-based grading and every district had to create its own, like, that's a lot of time and energy that's not spent on actually the work we got into it to do, which was to work with children. So having some of that statewide consistency, I think is good. Having statewide graduation requirements so that there's balance. Yeah, so I'm not wedded to 5 districts. I'm intrigued by the CTE one. I'm intrigued by the one that Senator Baumgart's just put forth. I haven't had time to examine it in great detail. I am concerned again because of my district and where I live about independent schools being an option for not just the historic academies, perhaps, and small schools, if it's viable, but sometimes it is about education. When it is so small that you can't even have a basketball team because there's one kid that wants to play, and you can't have a band because there's 2 kids and no music teacher, it can be too small.
Yes.
To be education quality, not just money. I think definitely the roles of the AOE and the state board do need to be delineated specifically. I'm somewhat concerned about shifting too much to one over the other, especially with capacity issues to consider. What else do I have? Consistency through the state board. Definitely funding. I think definitely I like the idea of switching the way to that foundation formula and reversing the way budgeting is done. I think, again, there's been a lot, school budget votes have caused a lot of strife and anxiety, and it's not very much tied to my community. It's like we cut my budget to the bone and my taxes still went up because it's this statewide pool and it went up somewhere else.
Right.
So there's a few things. I'm sure there's more. What's a few?
I have to.
I'm sure I would have even more if I looked at it again tonight.
All right, so, everybody's, they want to take a little break.
It's the same one.
I didn't hear anybody, saying we shouldn't consolidate the number of districts that we have.
I think we're all in agreement on
So,
something.
let me ask, very quickly go around the table and say, okay, why do we want fewer larger districts? Casey,
Why do we want fewer larger districts?
yes,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say, and you can sort of say, argue it in both the world where it does save money and in a world where it actually doesn't make much of a difference.
I was always with former Representative Larry Copley with the one district, so that's part of one of my thinking. But I think it will help with if we look at what our reasoning behind the BOCES model was to consolidate and share those services. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why this consolidation will work, is we'll be able to share services and across school or across town lines and into several other districts. Like I said, I wasn't married to the 5-member district. I think it's a cost savings, but it's also good, I think, for this. I mean, I guess I said it all when I said it's the BOCES model, I guess. I don't need to talk around, I don't need to overstate my point there.
I think it could save money in some administrative costs and other administrative positions that could probably serve a larger population, like our DEI coordinators, our wellness coordinators. I mean, those are things that I think could exist across larger districts, superintendents, assistant superintendents. However, I think that we're saying, why do we want less? So I think this is also in the spirit of compromise, like we're being asked to do something. And I feel like this is sort of a middle ground that we can do without sort of the problems we've identified with going so big as 5. So we need to be willing to move somewhere. And I feel like the sort of idea that I put out is tied to some educational outcomes. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rob?
Well, I think if I'm remembering correctly, all of these numbers and the districts, it's all kind of predicated on this idea that that there'd be more resources, right? That it'd be better for the kids. So I'd say maybe that's true. I like the Starbucks model that Josh put forward. I like that idea of consistency, but I'm also really concerned about facilities. I'm concerned about access and kids getting more. Yeah. So if we move to fewer districts, whatever that number is, if the resources improve for schools, school districts, good.
Jana?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of agree. It's interesting what Casey's saying about the BOCES model. I mean, I suppose I support the concept of larger districts with uniformity and resource sharing for the same reasons that I supported BOCES. I guess what I'm not really, and I sort of understand at a really high level that, streamlining the org charts of whatever these newer, larger districts might look like sort of makes sense on paper. I'm just concerned about the cost of transformation, the disruption to the system, the power shifting that inevitably happens when you completely transform the public education system. So to me, I sort of understand the academic gains that might be possible, but sort of the cost of doing the work and the risks involved make me a little bit hesitant there. But I also sort of wonder why we can't actually achieve some of these goals without a complete system-wide transformation. It seems like we sort of know the tools that we can use to start to get ourselves there. And so I just kind of wonder about, I sort of wonder about jumping ahead to like a huge overhaul.
What was the question?
The question is,
Yes, she was on her own.
everybody seems to be in support of the idea of fewer districts, or what's called fewer supervisories. And so the question is why? And also, if it doesn't necessarily show to save significant dollars, do you still support it? And why?
I support it to an extent, and I support it in the sense that some of what we have right now is hyper small. And so I certainly support it in that extent. And it's hyper small, both in how it operates, some of the overhead, and also governance, having so many board members or having, a superintendent that it has to answer, like in our country, just so many supervisory unions. So I think it makes sense to streamline some of that. I would love to better understand the savings of district consolidation. I think we all have our ideas around what it is and, fewer superintendents, sure. They're often the highest paid. That's, so if we go in half, that's a sum, but that isn't a big dramatic savings. And so I think for me, then the reasons to do it are, to move us more towards scale. If the numbers in the APA report about I think 3,700 is the average district size in the country, sort of 4,000 to 6,000 is your sort of tipping point of ideal efficiencies. I come from a district of 3,900. It works perfectly fine. We're pretty high functioning. So it seems silly to say, but it seems like, well, then shouldn't everybody at least be as big as CVSD? And I realize that's oversimplifying it, but, I think that, districts 4,000 are a pretty workable structure. So I think that there's some efficiency, there's some consistency. I think it improves consistency, but I don't want to oversimplify. I think to think that by having kids in the same district, you're going to just be able to get the same cup of coffee is appreciate the analogy, but I just think that's so kind of far from the reality of what schools do, and that you have all these different humans and then all these different humans teaching them. And it's so, consistency is good and we should strive for it. And there's a lot of research about that, but we're never going to have that kind of uniformity in something so human. So it improves. I think it can improve consistency and for good reasons, and hopefully improves consistency of teaching too. I think, oh God, I'm losing my. I think that having a structure that's whatever pieces of it that help our system be more stable. I think we are in this just hyper instability that is bad for everyone, and so. Instead of asking every budget year, oh my God, are we going to change big? We're not going to. Oh, they like the budgets. They didn't like the budgets. Having predictability and stability are the conditions we need to set at the state level for schools to be able to do the quality work. And I don't think we can dictate on paper what quality is. That's the work of educational leaders. But we have to create the conditions for stability. And so answering questions that they've been asked again and again and again for so many years. Finally providing some answers on some stability, I think is the reason for some district consolidation. But I don't have a sense that it's going to be a magic improve student outcomes. I think the thing that improves student outcomes is high quality teaching. And so what are the things we need to do to have high quality teaching? We need stability, we need teachers, we need high quality teachers. We need instructional leaders in our school who are worried about how to support their teachers, not how to get a budget passed. So all of these structural things that can help create stability and consistency in our schools should allow for the conditions for quality and opportunity. Yes, I think we should still. Consolidation, I'm not sure.
That was the short answer.
All right,
Yeah, that was not a short answer.
so I would say, I would support, having consolidation, even if it didn't necessarily save a great deal of money. I think one of the things that lends to instability is the inability to attract high quality leadership. And when you try to find 52 superintendents and 52 business managers, you're not always getting the best people. And I think by having fewer districts, you could have some very high quality leadership at the top of each of those, as well as very high quality financial management and sort of financial control. So I see just a lot of operational benefits to it. And, you know, I do think that we are a little bit of a Wild West system in Vermont where everybody goes off and does their own thing, however they want to do it. Creates inequities that we probably shouldn't have. And so I think building systems on larger district models can help that. I think we also probably in the state need to actually measure outcomes in order to know if we're getting outcomes. And maybe part of all of this is, let's also look at our educational quality standards and how they can actually be measured. As opposed to just sort of the goals and all that. And I agree with Casey that the scale of larger districts would hopefully achieve some of the same things we were trying to get through with BOCES. I mean, I would say in the absence of fewer districts, BOCES is a must turbocharge kind of thing. But you know, when you got scale, you can have better professional development. You can have a lot of things that we go without now because we're so disjointed.
Most of the stuff has already been said, but definitely I believe that it would create better resource sharing with larger districts, which would create better opportunities for the students. I also think larger districts creates equity of voice across different economic situations in towns, in an ideal world, that is. And I had one more thing. But it's gone.
It'll come back.
So I mean, I'm with Peter that whether there's cost savings or not, I think that the consolidation of districts is the logical next step for that in the conversation. I do think there would be an operational savings just in the reduction of operational structure, even if it was to 15, there would be an inherent savings. How much, that's a hard one to quantify. I do think that there is, you know, as you get into looking at schools that are viable, whatever that means, or not viable, whatever that means, in the, you know, and whatever we decide that means. I think there is savings there when you start moving things around, but it's, as I think was said in some of the previous testimony, it's a longitudinal savings. It's not a today's savings. It could be a 5 or 6 year savings, right? That almost $200 million is a long-term process. It's not a next year, but the ball starts rolling now. I like that, you know, there's that educational, and I think there'll be an educational and operational consistency that will happen. Like I use the coffee model. Well, I use the coffee model, like it's more striving for it, right? Like it's never going to be perfect, but we've talked about how you want there to be that equitable education, but that's what that consistency is, right? If you go to one school, you may not walk into the same painted, beautiful building, but you may have that 4th grade math kid coming out of 4th grade is going to have the same as 4th grade math out of somewhere else, hopefully, right? That consistency keeps going. And then more opportunities for kids, right? That's what it's all about. So we talk about not wanting to, having a hard time with looking at these smaller schools and what do we do with them. But if you have classes that are 3 kids deep, 4 kids deep, just because of geographical location, there is not a lot of collaboration with the kids, right? Like even in my district, which has 2 high schools, and we're not considered small schools, well, we struggle in a lot of our higher ed classes to have more than 2 kids. Yeah. And not that merging the 2 schools together would satisfy any town person's feelings. You would actually be able to put more kids in the classroom to have more collaboration. So I do think thinking of, you know, these larger districts that start bringing smaller schools together, whether it be build a whole new unit that takes care of 4 towns or an elementary school that takes care of a whole region. I don't know, but that to me, right, it is about the students. It's about the kids. And, you know, a lot of times I feel like it's how we're so I mean, I'm not from Vermont, but I'm tied to the Vermont values and that local control and that small community. That's why I moved here. And it's hard for me. But I do see the bigger picture of that consistency from, you know, or striving.
Yeah. You totally You made me remember. So yes, consistency in curriculum. When I heard that word consistency, it's the consistency in curriculum. Would be extremely beneficial.
I think I would echo Emily that we want to put kids first in all of these decisions. And I think I just heard it to my right as well. I do think that fewer districts could likely mean improved opportunities for kids. And that's what matters most. I always get frustrated when I hear about a high school that's offering engineering. And we don't offer it at my school, or AP Calc BC, the second half. Oh, they get it and we don't, like, we talk about equitable outcomes, equitable opportunities for students, but we can't quite get there because my school's not big enough. So we don't have enough kids, which means we don't have enough,
Right.
so all of that. And I also think that fewer districts can mean hanging on to some of those smaller community schools. So I think there's a trade-off. I'm hearing a lot in my email inbox about wanting to save these community schools. And then they also say, we don't want to redistrict, whatever, but I think there's give and take. And I think if we expand the size of the district and we save money and administrative costs, then we can turn around and use that money to breathe some life into these schools. And I can't remember who came in to testify, but I loved the idea of those two sister schools that were close enough to each other, that one could be K3 and the other could be 4-6.
Yeah.
And now instead of a class of third graders that has 3 in it, you have 8 in them.
Yeah.
And that's way better, right? It's better. Better is better. So, that's all I got. Still struggling with a head cold, so better is better.
Better is
Well
better.
said.
I love
Good
that.
tagline.
Better is better.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah,
What's the
right.
other one?
Yeah, it's more better.
All right, Emily.
There you go.
All right, so I'm gonna stay consistent and say that you didn't hear me say anything about district consolidation before. The only reason to do it, in my mind, is to improve educational opportunities and outcomes for kids. And I think that there's some need to do that in the state. And, but I'm not hung up on a map or lines or how many or where or what they're based around at all at this point in time, because really for me, we've heard enough about from research-based decisions around the appropriate size for our districts. And I think we should stay focused on that, what is best for kids. And that's going to be really important. It could, I think, consolidating districts could improve educational opportunities through, the shared resources that we've all been talking about and staffing. It must, in my mind, if we're going to do that, it must create equity for our students. That's really important to me. I want to make sure that we're addressing in the discussions around this, if we're moving forward with this, we need to address the local impact on communities. And whether they're gonna feel once removed from their schools because of the larger district. So I'm not trying to suggest we need to do something, but I'm saying when we're making those decisions, that should be in the back of our minds, because we want to keep the strong support that we have in Vermont for our local schools and for public education. We really do. And I don't want us to harm that. I want to strengthen that as we move forward, because our schools are really about our kids' education first, and what, they strengthen our communities as well. Good schools strengthen our communities. So I don't want to lose that. I don't think advisory boards are the answer for that. I'll just say that right up front. Erin said something about predictability and stability, and that is so important. That has got to be an outcome of creating bigger districts. And your comments, Peter, about operational benefits, that's what it means to, right? We need to be able to identify those operational benefits. And I think there are some. I don't see this you asked this earlier, Peter, I don't necessarily see this as saving us much money at all. If it saves us any, it may, and we appreciated some savings for a very short time when we consolidated our governance structures in Act 46. But I don't see this as, especially if we're gonna put kids first. It's expensive to educate kids and it's just the way it's gonna be, and we're gonna put that first. But I don't think that's the reason to not do it. I think it will stabilize the costs that have been growing. I'm hoping that's what will happen. I think there's a lot of people hung up on you get rid of a bunch of superintendents and suddenly you got all this extra money. That is not how it works. I don't believe. So I'm still saying that if we're not saving a boatload of money, it's not a reason to not move forward with it.
And if I could just add on, it could just be about shifting money again, spending less on administration so you can spend more on outcomes for students.
And again,
Maybe.
operational cross, equity and stability, all those things. Thanks.
Maybe not good, the stability and predictability. And I think when you have the hyper local, hyper small, there isn't stability. Like people say, why do you have to rewrite the school schedule every single year? Because I wrote the schedule for the book. Well, because this year we have to have a combined 3-4, and next year it's gotta be a 4-5, and 10 kids moved in to this class, and there's no, when you're super small districts, there's no stability. You're always putting out fires. And when you're putting out fires, you're not having an instructional leader. The principal's so busy pushing paper around, or the superintendent is going to 17 different board budget meetings. So the inefficiency of the system, I think, has taken away opportunities for students and stability for students and for teachers. It's like, oh, this year you're teaching 4th grade, next year you're teaching 5th grade, learn this curriculum. So whether it saved any money or not, I think some consolidation has to happen. The equity piece is totally inequitable across the state. And yeah, I don't want the money to go to paper pushing.
I would just add one other thing about larger districts, which we saw in our own, when we did an Act 46 merger. There's also, it creates a lot of job stability.
Yeah.
If you're a last in, if you're in a district that is just an elementary school, your job security is nothing. You're part of a larger system, then all of a sudden,
And I'll say that
attrition works in your favor.
we were talking about, with superintendents, getting quality candidates. I think teacher retention has become a big issue as well, not just because of the money, but the unpredictability. I mean, I didn't make much money where I was, and I was okay with that. I didn't expect it. But there's no stability because next year I might have to do something completely different. This year I'm doing, and they can't ever get their feet under them and feel like they're actually doing what they wanted to do, which is teaching children.
So, what I would take away from some of this conversation, I think we'll break, and it's gonna be the challenge that we will all face, all legislators, as we talk about doing educational transformation, is the struggle sort of between sort of excellence of education for children, tradition, community, adults,
Yes.
and how we navigate that is gonna be tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, Josh.
I wanted to go back to something Kate mentioned was this school has an engineering program and I don't have it, or this school has a really killer art program and I don't have it, right? I don't know that there's a way to create that same consistency across all schools, because not every school may be able to have this killer auditorium or this, right? So that's where I think that intra-district choice that could be available kind of bridges that gap by saying, okay, well, I want to go to an art school because or something that is a liberal arts kind of background specializing. I can go there, and then the person who wants to go to an engineering or tech center or something of that, they have the choice to enter their district, go to the schools where you can put those types of facilities with the infrastructure we have. Because some districts have that infrastructure, some will not. So I'm not trying to hijack your comment, but it was just made me think of that Like there are ways to use this to actually do all the things, whether it's every school has an engineering and a killer engineering and art program, or certain schools in a district so that kids can actually.
I've been saying that for a long time, just within this area.
Yeah,
If we put Barry, Montpelier and U32 together,
yeah.
but in my mind, those schools that we're talking about, a liberal arts high school or a STEM high school, those are public high schools. And I don't want to use the word choice, because when we talk about choice, it often leads back to voucher systems and
Mhm.
whatever. I want to just think about opportunities, and that every eighth grader would have the opportunity to go to maybe 3 different schools, a CTE, a STEM school, and a liberal arts school that are all public.
So
In the
you're saying this, we are just talking about the exact same thing. We're just choosing to call it 2 different things.
I
And I
agree.
think too, that like publicly, that's a good conversation to have so that, you know, those who call it choice can still think of it as such, and those who don't can think of it as such, and know that there's no boogeyman in between, that it's actually like to benefit all kids. So I like that, you know, thinking through different lenses of what it could be called or how it could be addressed. Thank you.
Late on us.
I guess I worry, I think maybe a little bit about what both of you are saying there, because in theory, I think absolutely agree. It sounds nice. I worry very much a little bit what you said, Dan, about, you know, any amount of choice or flexibility is only for some, and particularly, you know, so much comes out of transportation. And so having that, like in an ideal world, I would love those. Honestly, parents are cutthroat, crazy people. You know, being in the world, I mean, but I worry that like the minute there's an that there feels like, oh, I could get a little bit more, my kid could do this, could do that. And we set up sort of a competitive, like, you know, system of like, well, if I want my kid to really have enough AP courses, then I'm gonna have to send them to this school, so I'm gonna have to drive them. And you know, there is inequity in our system right now, absolutely, and so I'm interested in improving it. I'm concerned about, and I don't think we're ever gonna get to like every high school is gonna have the same offerings, but better, closer to some more consistent offerings. Some schools are gonna have their niches. They're gonna have something that's a little cooler one place. Some teacher comes in and creates an incredible natural resource program, and they've got goats and chickens and like, you know, it's gonna happen, and then it won't happen somewhere. That stuff I can live with some difference. I do worry about even like the sort of magnet school idea, the way it's sort of been talked about by the secretary of like, you know, an aeronautics thing that it is so good in theory, but I just, from what I see at the school level, is the minute there is more kind of, it takes a process to get to something. You have to know about how to access it. A parent or a guardian might have to be a bit of more of an advocate, might have to provide the transportation, might have to pay a little extra fee because some of the materials are more expensive. I just worry that we explode inequality, and that the kids who have less opportunity are gonna be the least likely to be able to go to have those opportunities, and that we will just sort of compound opportunity for
All
those
the
who already
money
have.
that we're
a
gonna
lot.
be saving, we'll be able to transport those.
So
kids.
maybe,
In my
I
mind,
just like, I
they
need to
all get
see,
to go
it's like,
with-
I like the theory, I am so worried about the reality.
And those
on the
regional
ground.
high schools that we're gonna put up, they've
Well,
got
I
it
would
in
just- I would
different
just
ends of their
remind everybody
building,
that we
different
already-
wings.
We do have public high school
All
choice
the
right
time.
now.
We
do.
Like in Massachusetts and California, they do this. They
Yeah.
do exactly what's in here proposed, and they do it well. And they have, it's more dense population.
They operate on a
I
much
just-
different
That's the
scale.
harder,
Yeah.
Right, but I just came from San Diego and Vista, even if you go to the other side of Vista, it takes the same amount of time as it takes for me to get the stove from here, right? So you know, there are ways to do it well, and we might have to look towards some of these other states and how they're doing it to make it do well, but I think it's still doable, but I understand. your
Some of
concern.
this, you know, some of this would be a district decision.
Right.
Yeah.
We want these to be district